What's up, Star Wars nerds? And on this edition of Hyperdrives, I will be counting down my top 5 favorite droids from on screen and going over my favorite 3.75 figure of them. However, I will not be counting C-3PO and R2-D2 in this countdown because I thought it would just be more fun that way. They would be two obvious choices, leaving only 3 spots for interesting discussion. Also, I'm limiting this top 5 to live action on-screen droids only. I will not be considering any droids from animated series. And before we get started, just a couple of shout outs to droids that I really love that just didn't make the cut in my top 5, starting with BB-8. Love BB-8, love the practical effects of BB-8, but unfortunately I think they went a little over the top with this character in episodes 8 and 9. It rubbed me the wrong way, and I think that's probably what pushed him out of my top 5. And my next honorable mention goes to Chopper. Love Chopper, especially from the Rebels series. It was a very tough decision leaving Chopper out of my top 5, but ultimately I think I associate him more with that Rebels animated series. Alright, with that said, let's get started, and my number 5 pick is the Power Droid, aka Gonk Droid. These are lovable droids all over the Star Wars galaxy. You can find them in several different Star Wars media. Completely unsophisticated and completely lovable. Protect them at all costs. I'm looking at you, 8D8. And for the best 3.75 Gonk Droid, I'm going to go with the Vintage Collection. This is kind of the easy choice. This is my graded Gonk Droid. This was actually the first figure I ever got graded just to test things out. Here is a loose one. Looks very good. This is based off the Lars Homestead version of the Gonk Droid. Pretty cool. His legs do not really articulate though. They're a little flexible. But the top comes off, showing the battery inside, which is pretty cool little feature there. That being said, I gotta bring in the original Kenner Gonk Droid. This thing is 1,000 times more charming in my opinion. I just love the nostalgia of this droid and the clicky sounds of the legs that fully articulate. And so I actually gotta say this is my favorite 3.75 Gonk Droid, even though it's obviously not as screen accurate. My number 4 choice is definitely a personal one. I can't imagine a lot of people putting this guy in their top 5, but it's 21B, the medical droid. Absolutely love this droid. Been fascinated with him since I was a little kid. I mean, he's basically a doctor. He helps save Luke's life. He helps save Luke's hand, and he's extremely polite.
Take care, sir. Thanks.
As far as modern figures go, you really only have one choice, and that's this 21B from the Power of the Force 2 line. There was a episode 3 version of 21B that came out in 30th anniversary, but it's just not the same version of this droid at all. This figure was also repacked in a Vintage Collection special action figure set, but it does not hold up to today's modern standards. And so like I did with a Gonk Droid, I gotta bring in the original Vintage Kenner version of 21B. This is one of my favorite Kenner figures of all time. I loved this droid figure when I was a kid, and they did a great job on this. I mean, look at that. What a great mold. I think Kenner nailed it with this one. I mean, I really believe this is one of the best vintage Kenner Star Wars figures ever made. And so even though he may not be quite as screen accurate as the Power of the Force 2 version, I still think he is my favorite 21B figure so far, but we definitely need an all-new 21B in the Vintage Collection. At number 3, I have IG-11 from The Mandalorian. What a fantastic droid. You guys know I love bounty hunters, and I love bounty hunter droids, and we finally got to see an IG unit in action with The Mandalorian, and it was a sight to see him kicking butt, taking out all of those goons. And here is the figure. And in addition to being an absolute killing machine, he was also very funny, being voiced by the hilarious Taika Waititi. So the best and only 3.75 figure we have of IG-11 is of course the Vintage Collection one. What a fantastic figure, VC206. This is one of my favorite TVC figures. I felt like it got a little overshadowed when it came out because we just had some really good other releases that year, but it really is a fantastic figure. Hasbro nailed this one. Great mold with a lot of detail, great paint apps, great articulation. I love the fact that he's got those 3 different layers on his head that each articulate individually. That was a great touch. And this figure is a ton of fun to pose and set up in different situations. My number 2 favorite on-screen droid is B2EMO from Andor. What a fantastic droid done with practical effects. And for the first time in live action, and maybe in all of Star Wars, we had an astromech type droid that actually spoke basic rather than a bunch of beeps. And that gave him a lot more character in my opinion. But more importantly with this character, Andor showed us a much more emotional side of droids, particularly with dealing with loss and sadness. Now we got got a hint of that with R2-D2 and C-3PO, but Andor really took it to another level with B in a way that really connected us with this droid and made us care about him, maybe more than any other character on the show.
I'll have them clear the room if you want to be alone.
I don't want to be alone. I want Mama Marva.
Are you crying? Am I crying? No, I'm not crying. You're crying.
So for figures, there's really only one choice in 3.75, and that is the Disney Droid Factory version of B2 EMO. Was really surprised that Hasbro did not put out a Vintage Collection version, but the Disney version is just fine. It's a really good figure. You've got plenty of articulation. He kind of does that accordion stretching and compressing. The top part of his head with the eyes can swivel, which is fantastic. And they actually put little wheels on the bottom of his feet. So great little figure. And finally, my number one favorite droid from live action movies or TV shows is K2SO from Rogue One and soon to be from season 2 of Andor. What a fantastic design of a droid, but with K2SO specifically, it just has a perfect combination of abilities to be menacing, but also witty and hilarious at the same time. And in the case of Rogue One, he's not just there for comic relief, he is an integral part of the story and even ends up sacrificing himself for the greater good. For those reasons, K2SO is not only one of my favorite droids in Star Wars, but he's also one of my favorite overall characters in Star Wars.
I'll be there for you. Cassian said I had to.
So for the best 3.75 figure of K2SO, you gotta go with the Vintage Collection one. We now have two different versions. You've got the original Rogue One release, and now we have the recent Andor release. It is basically a repack. There's some very subtle, slight paint differences, but for the most part, they are the exact same figure. Here's the Andor release of K2SO, and in my opinion, this is a highly underrated Vintage Collection figure. I thought they did a great job with this one. The articulation is on point. He looks really good. There's no significant screen accuracy issues or anything like that, and he's really well put together, and what I mean by that is his joints are very stiff and strong, and so I was able to pose him like you see here, holding up stormtroopers, and I had this figure posed like that for months with no issues, with the arms coming down or the figure falling over. Great figure, and what a fantastic droid from Star Wars. Thanks for watching.